you do not like work, I don't think you're going to like heaven, because we will be working in heaven. AI is quick. It's transformative in a really profound way. A sinful world provides the ability for man to do more bad or more good. And that what will come out of a technological tool comes out of the heart of the person using it. I am not ever going to concede that AI requires us to abandon first principles.
This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. Is work a burden, or is it part of God's design for human flourishing? We're joined today by David Bahnsen, a nationally recognized investor, economist, and author who has spent years helping Christians think more deeply about the integration of faith and work. You can listen to this episode of The City of God on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, or you can watch the full video version on YouTube or at crm.tv. And now, let's welcome David Bahnsen to the City of God. David, give us a little snapshot of your work today and how your faith has personally shaped your vision for the marketplace and your everyday work.
So when I look at what I do every day, and I wake up to and actually make my living doing, I'm engaged in financial services and investing client money for the aim of creating solutions on behalf of clients. What that does is allow me to be in all aspects of the marketplace. So I have to have a view to what's happening in the economy. That's my training is in economics. There's a real life business managing about $10 billion of client capital, but then I'm interacting with other companies and businesses as investment opportunities. So it's a pretty broad net. But then on top of that, very reason we're sitting here together right now, I want to take what I believe about all this and also message it to the community. And so I spent a lot of time writing and thinking and speaking about a vision for the marketplace, and particularly the integration of faith and work. And so all of these things overlap in a way, but where I certainly make my living is in actually delivering client solutions around financial matters.
I think it would be safe to say that most people, even well-meaning Christians, think that work is somehow a result of the fall. It's a burden we have to bear every day, but one day we'll go to heaven and then eventually experience the consummated kingdom, and we'll be freed from work. We'll be freed from labor. Help correct that understanding of work and give us, our audience, a biblical framework for understanding what we've ultimately been called to do as Christians.
It's interesting because if you think about the way you laid that out as to what most people think, there's this part in the middle that they're correct about the consummation, but it's the part afterwards that we're going to be freed from work that's inaccurate. And it's the part at the beginning that work was born out of the curses, out of the fall. So there's a sort of barbell problem on the front and back end that has to be corrected. The good news is, Pastor, it's very correctable, because I've never met anyone who made the same mistake about the other curse. I have never encountered someone who said, children are all a curse, and when we get to heaven, we won't have to deal with children anymore. They believe rightly that there are pains of childbirth, but that children are fundamentally part of God's created design for his world and his people, and that they're a blessing. All we have to do is show the fact that theologically, going through that text, it requires us to understand the same thing about work, that work was instituted, work was created before the fall. So we have to have a Genesis 1 understanding of work, not start our understanding at Genesis 3. And so by being able to demonstrate a creational understanding rooted to Imago Dei, that us being made in the image of God is where work is established, and that is fundamental pre-sin to who we are as people. And then that casts the vision for what we're to do here and in a fallen world, and what it will look like on the other side of glory. And I tell people all the time, if you do not like work, I don't think you're going to like heaven, because we will be working in heaven.
So if that's true, that we need to have a Genesis 1 vision of work, why were human beings created in the Imago Dei? Why were they created to work in the first place?
Well, the question is, why did he create us in his image? Because by making us in his image, it inherently made us as workers, because he is a worker. How do we know that? The entire creation account. The first 25 verses of Genesis 1 are God working, creating the world and appreciating his work day by day by day. And he wasn't making small things. He was making the oceans and the mountains and separating the sky and the land. I mean, and this was really leading to God's design, which was what those of us in the Christian faith refer to as the Emmanuel principle. He wanted to be with us. And so God made us to be in communion with him and as co-creators with him. And he establishes that in Genesis 1. And then, of course, sin polluted this, corrupted it, and now we get to live in the part of history where he's redeeming all these things to himself.
Every generation has had to deal with the technological advances and innovations of their society. Christians have, in some instances, embraced them well, and some have not embraced them well. When you think about the rapidly changing nature of technology, particularly in the area of AI, how do we need to be thinking about that as Christians, particularly those that are engaging in the space of faith and work integration?
So I'm a first principles guy. And what I mean by that is I don't know how to think about things in application until I first rooted them to principles. And if I believed that every single new technological innovation or just every new context required me to make up new principles, then I wouldn't believe anything. So what I believe is you have to start with what the first principles are and then seek to provide contemporary and relevant and thoughtful applications. I am the first to admit AI is quick. It's transformative in a really profound way, but I am not ever going to concede that AI requires us to abandon first principles. So whether we're talking about the fire or the wheel or the other elements in the 20th century of digital technology, all the way to AI now, the first principle is that technology in a sinful world provides the ability for man to do more bad or more good. And that what will come out of a technological tool comes out of the heart of the person using it. So I do not look at AI as something for Christians to view in a Luddite sense or in a sense of it being inherently sinful, but nor do I think they should take lightly the potential for AI to be used very sinfully. But it is, like all technology before it, something that can be, a lot of good can come of, and I fear a lot of bad can come of too.
When you think about the confusion for Christians thinking about their work, you often talk about the sacred secular divide. That's not something that happened overnight. I mean, that's rooted in philosophy. It's rooted in a false understanding of the biblical narrative and creation order. But help kind of unpack kind of how did we get here? Because when you look at the Protestant Reformation and kind of the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers, that certainly wasn't their understanding of the sacred calling that every Christian has. Yeah. So how did that happen? What are the false narratives and false ideologies that sacred secular divide's rooted in, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question, Pastor. In a more modern history sense, I believe if you're looking at over the last 125 years, that the temptation to go to a strong sacred secular divide and an overall posture of retreatism was largely born out of early 20th century churches' capitulation and intimidation from modernism and Darwinism, that they felt that they had lost out of the Enlightenment and that therefore we should just retreat away. And that the 20th century is sort of a story of the Christian church doing it and then undoing it, saying, okay, this didn't go very well. And so at a high level, the temptation to dualism in the last 100 years came from there. But when you ask what are the false ideologies and the philosophical and larger historical context, I believe dualism is the cousin of the ancient heresy of Gnosticism. I think it fundamentally comes from Platonic thought, and that ultimately Christians are the one group of thinkers that are to know better. That fundamentally God did not make the material world as this inferior thing that is dirty, and the spiritual world is this place of enlightened knowledge, that we have an incarnational God, and that Jesus being fully God and fully man means something, that the material and spiritual worlds exist for a Christian because both matter to God. And then the sacred secular distinction, which I think you're right, the Protestant Reformation in a lot of ways came to cure. and priesthood of all believers and the explicit thinking of Martin Luther, John Calvin, others gave us a course correction that we were looking to apply as a Protestant church for hundreds of years. 20th century got away from. Right now we're struggling with what it looks like to get it back. We're struggling with what it looks like to get it back in politics and civics, education. The area I'm most concerned with is in economics, finance, the marketplace at large. I actually think that's the area we're struggling with it the most. That there is an embedded sacred secular distinction in the way Christians think about work, even as they've largely improved at casting aside a distinction in education and civics.
So when you think about two of the extremes that you see that Christians suffer from, maybe in the area of economics, embracing a view of secular capitalism, maybe some that don't even think about their calling in finance. They're not doing anything wrong. They're not doing anything immoral, but they've been tempted by the extreme pietism that has crept into the church, particularly the evangelical church. Give our audience, we do have a number of people in the industry that you're in. How do you have a grace restores nature vision for economics and for finance in the 21st century?
Well, you have to start with those first principles as to what a market is and what those who work in finance are doing. And when we say I'm using markets as a means to an end to deliver a result to my clients, what you've said is true, but it's totally incomplete. How and why are markets a means to an end for your client? The notion that these things just happen and I'm going to take advantage of them just happening and put that to use for my clients is very incomplete and also very vulnerable. There'll be times where it's called into question that they just happen. We have to understand that markets are fundamentally human interactions. And what we believe about the human person matters in what we do in finance and what we're trying to accomplish. All at once, we get to take advantage of market dynamics, the way in which God made the world, the freedom that human people have, celebrating the freedom, exploiting the freedom, and the rational faculties of mankind, the rational reality of self-interest and so forth. Put it to use. These are productive, creative, innovative capacities that human beings have that create things that are investable. So that market dynamic exists, and those of us in finance need to be, as my late father would say, epistemologically self-aware. Okay, I think that Christians who are in the finance space that are not self-aware of this are doing themselves and their clients a disservice. And then at the same time, be aware of the temptations, the pitfalls, the other negatives. What Christians engaged in finance often do, and you're right to say it's large in the evangelical space, is limit a distinctly Christian view of this to the space of generosity. That what makes it distinctly Christian is I'm going to tell people once all these other worldly things have happened and then the money's there, then let's apply some Christian stuff on top by what? Giving it away. Well, I'm all for generosity, I'm all for tithing, I'm all for philanthropy, but no, I think there's an entire process there of market mechanisms that has to be understood in a kingdom context.
For the parents and grandparents that are watching, they're wrestling with the next generation continuing to be swept away, which is amazing because you just look at history and see what communism and socialism has done. But we continue to face, you see what's happening in New York City. I don't need to tell you with the new mayor. Still seeing a generation, seeing leaders of institutions of higher education still continuing to advance. That socialism ultimately is the answer. It just hasn't been implemented well. So give us a good biblical defense of free market enterprise, capitalism, and why we need to be continually vigilant against the dangers of socialism and communism.
Well, I would argue that not only do we have to be continually vigilant, but we have to start to be vigilant in the right way, which does require a defense of markets, of free enterprise that is rooted to the right things. So I think a big part of what you're describing is because we didn't have that to begin with. So my view of this in a more modern history context is that the 2008 was the seminal final moment, that it called into question, okay, we believe in markets because they work, and we called it capitalism. Well, let's start with that. I don't really like that term. I know what people mean by it, and by what people mean by it, I'm a capitalist. But the ism is not capital. Capital is a means to an end. I am defending a free society. I'm defending free enterprise. I'm defending creational normatives. Capital is a part of it, but Karl Marx is who termed it capitalism. It was meant to be manipulative. Young people are not animated by capitalism. They are animated by freedom. They are animated by people enhancing their quality of life. They are animated by productivity, the things that come out of a free and enterprising society. So we have to do this holistically. And I think that the basic argument against socialism, communism, the godlessness of it, the theft of it, the high state intervention, but it fails to understand how God made the world. God made us with rational faculties. We respond to incentives. You take away incentives with socialism and with communism. God also made knowledge broadly dispersed in society. He did not give all knowledge to Washington, D.C. You have knowledge of certain pockets in your area. I have knowledge in mine. Small businessmen in Nebraska, farmers. There's this sort of localism to the world because God has dignity in the individual. A top-down central planning approach is not just bad politics. I think it's that too, but it's bad theology. And so our defense of a free society has to take these things into account. How can we do that as a Christian church if we're afraid of economics? If the last 2 minutes of what I've said bores people. We have to embrace economics, not as a dismal science, but as a great part of a moral philosophy, a part of Christian kingdom living.
Final question for you, David. For the person that's watching this podcast or listening, they're saying, well, we're not at the status of a David Bahnsen. We don't have our own business. Stay-at-home mom, a plumber, an educator, a coach, any person that claims to follow Jesus Christ, how do they, in very small practical ways, fulfill the creation mandate on a daily basis?
Well, first of all, one of the things that was very important to me, because I thought this would come up, because I have a highly respected socioeconomic profession, like in that domain. And I did not want people to say, David wrote this book with his rigorous defense and excitement and joy of work. Easy for him to say in a suit and tie job on 6th Avenue. But one of the things I did in the book was start each chapter with a job I had along the way, because I most certainly did not start my career this way. And I think that that's one of the most important things to understand about this free society that I'm championing and believe in. The way you can move your station in life, the way in which you have, as long as we don't cramp down on a free society, people have the ability to go grow in what they're doing. But there are some professions that are not going to be as exciting to certain people, and yet the principles, I think, are all still there. Why does work involve joy? Why does it involve dignity and self-worth? Because God made it that way. People cannot and should not feel good about themselves in total and complete inactivity, a lack of contribution to the world around them. The transitive nature of work, whereby we help ourselves by helping others, by producing goods and services that meet other human needs, that inherently builds self-worth. It inherently builds excitement. It's what we do to chase our own dreams, hopes, and so forth. So it isn't limited to my profession. I have a calling, excitement in the financial sphere. You mentioned coaches, plumbers, artists. There's all kinds of creative and other endeavors. And there are things that don't necessarily compensate in the marketplace. Stay-at-home mothers, I don't think, get a great paycheck, but they're producing more than most people are on a day-by-day basis. So there's a really important principle there, that the producing of goods and services is not limited to those of an elite socioeconomic realm. That's the world's message. You should be excited about work if you are a big deal in the world. But what I would say in my view of work, and the biblical message of work, is that the plumber, the hotel maid, any number of professions can feel that same excitement through the service of others. And I think that it is one of the great blessings out of the biblical message of work, that all of us can wake up very excited for what we're going to do that day.
I love it. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for helpful categories and framework. I think the biggest message, we can't live our lives and we cannot fulfill our work simply in light of the Genesis 3 narrative, but we've got to look at Genesis 1 and 2 and Revelation 21 and 22 in order to fulfill our faithful calling. Thank you, David.
Thanks so much.
I love conversations like this, bringing faith and work together into one seamless worldview. I hope that after this conversation with David, you'll take a fresh look at your own work this week, not as a burden, but as part of God's design for your life. If you would you take a moment and leave a 5-star review? It helps more people discover the City of God. And when more people discover it, more Christians begin to think differently about how their faith shapes every part of life. You can stay connected with me and Coral Ridge Ministries throughout the week by following us on social media. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. This City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministry and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.